Thanks for coming out. Today, what we're going to talk about is we're from Frog Design, and these are our partners from Yahoo. We're going to talk about the work we did for Yahoo Messenger, a Vista-specific version of this thing. The title of the chat that we've got here is we called it Windows Presentation in the Real World Development. And by that we meant this was not about doing proof of concept. This wasn't about building prototypes. This was about us actually trying to build an application with these guys for the past few months. So that's us. We're going to introduce the team here a little more elaborately in a second, but you can see there's a lot of people here. There's almost as many on stage as out there. So this should be fun. So the outline of what we want to talk about is, just to give you a sense of what we're going to show, we'll give you a background of what set up the project, why even do this thing, how it was restructured. We had an initial engagement bit where we made a push for the first 50 days to have something ready, like a real product to a certain extent, pre-release product ready for CES, and that was shown. Some of you guys might have seen it. So we'll walk through that process, and that was sort of a super unique thing. After that, we're going to go through our workflows of what it took to make that happen. Some of them were very painful workflows, and then we've learned some lessons, and since then it's gotten a lot easier. The other thing is that the things we're going to show, as I've seen the things that Microsoft has shown over the past few days and some of the other breakouts, our workflows are very not clean. They're very messy, and our definition of a designer is very different than what's sort of been positioned a bit. So I think it'll be interesting for you guys to see a different take on some of this stuff. And at the end of that, we'll go through just some Q&A and any kind of stuff you want to ask. In terms of the team, this is the core group of basically the people who, most of whom are on stage, a couple of whom couldn't be here, of what it took to get this product to the point that it is that we'll show in a second. I'm Mark Ligamary. I'm the second guy there. I work at Frog Design. I'm an executive creative director. I'm down in the Austin studio. I've been with Frog for 2 years. Frog is a multidiscipline strategic creative consultancy. We do everything from industrial design to brand strategy to software design, which is what we're going to show today. And on this program, I was a lot of overhead, but I was the sort of a lead of a bit. So, and then Josh was also there.
Hi, I'm Josh Jacobson. I'm the product manager for Yahoo Messenger for Windows Vista. And so I was based in Sunnyvale. I am based in Sunnyvale with the core team on the Yahoo side.
I'm Kalani Cordes. I'm a visual designer for Frog Design. Been with Frog Design for 2.5 years. I've been working with WPF for about a little over a year.
Morning, everybody. I'm Lee Brimlow. I'm a senior design technologist at Frog Design. And I've been working with WPF for about a year, and my background is heavy Flash development, so I still consider myself probably a Flash developer first, but it's been interesting over the last year to see how I was able to apply some of my Flash skills to this new medium of WPF.
Mm-hmm. My name's Eric Burke. I was a lead developer on the client for Yahoo. I report to the Sunnyvale team, and I've been working with WPF about 18 months on and off, and before that, a lot of Win32. So it's been a fun transition for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we have a few other people listed out here because, like, I sort of wanted to give you guys a sense of what a team makeup might be. First is we had our design analyst sort of partake in this. So Evan really drove what we call, and we'll dig into this a little bit later, the software interaction design, so the workflows and the concept of how the things were going to come together. He couldn't be here today. And Brian Coe is another developer from Yahoo. He's actually here, but doesn't.
He's actually right there.
That's him. So that was basically the team, and some of the roles and responsibilities, not necessarily just on this project, but in general, some of their background.
So I'll give a quick background on why we're here at all. If any of you saw the session on Monday, we gave a little insight into that in more detail. But basically, a lot of companies are taking their applications that they created for Windows XP or even before, and they're just making sure they don't break in Windows Vista. And there's so much new stuff in Vista to take advantage of for user experience, especially where Yahoo really has to excel to keep and attract new users, that we thought it wasn't nearly sufficient enough to just put a new coat of paint on our old application or just make sure our old application was just working okay. So we decided as a philosophy at Yahoo, is to create native experiences for each operating system. And we wanted to be early in Vista so that when everyone else finally realized that they should design something for Vista, we would be on our second version, and we'd have our team and guys like Frog knowing all the ins and outs of the technology while everyone else was just getting started. So just to show you a quick background, this is our client for Windows XP, which many of you may have seen. We've got one that's native for Macintosh, written in the Cocoa UI. And then today we'll show you the one for Windows Vista. And then in the future, who knows what we'll create, but we'll keep creating these native experiences.
A black one, it looks like. Okay.
So another question is, well, why Frog Design? Again, about just over a year ago, we decided Vista's on its way. It's going to ship on new computers. Whether we like it or not, it's here. And we wanted to find a team that already knew a lot about Vista, and certainly the Frog team had that credibility. In fact, we had already been following Lee's blog in great detail, and it was like having a celebrity in our midst just to have him working on the project. And of course, they'd already done things at MIX06, and Frog Design's a well-known brand that everyone knows, which is just something that helped us with the familiarity with them. And also they had the domain knowledge, meaning they already had a lot of work, either personally or as a company, that they had done in Vista. And of course, we already had a master services agreement in place, which was very helpful to move the project along. One final thing, especially for me personally as product manager, I really value the startup style, the startup mentality of just iterate quickly, fail early and often. And this team was really very comfortable in that environment.
Failing quickly.
Failing.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So on that, we also called out the discipline set as well as something that we have Frog Design in terms of consultancies is fairly ancient. It's been around for 30 years. It has its roots in industrial design. So a lot of our disciplines actually have crossover between what we mean by sort of industrial design, software design, and overall strategy. So that's a piece of this mixed discipline set that we sort of brought into this. The other thing that we sort of invest in heavily is people like Lee and people that we call these design technologists, which act as liaisons for a lot of the design that we do, and translating that into software pieces. So I think that's another piece of the mix that was important here initially. Speaking of mix and some of the stuff you just mentioned, we actually did make a presentation last year at MIX06. We came out. We'd been working with WPF for a while. We had been working on it, I think, since the PDC previous to that, doing demos, etc. The chat that we gave was around doing better design and making it faster. And we saw an opportunity here with the technology. So basically, it was the chat had to do a lot with those new UI technologies coming online. It had to do with the general goodness of a separate UI layer from a business layer, and an investment there. We also made some somewhat provocative statements for us, which was, hey, we want to quit doing specifications in terms of a UI layer. We want to invest in the product itself as opposed to documenting it to death. I thought it was a very clever Guthrie's thing that he showed. What was that on the keynote where he showed the broken egg? We definitely have experience with that. I mean, we've been doing those broken eggs for about 6 years now and are pretty frustrated with that process. So we showed this. We say, hey, we want to get away from these red line specifications. We think that they don't translate into much. Lastly, we talked a little bit about, hey, these tools. We think it's, that's really the culprit here. There's a reason software design has been, or just software experiences have looked relatively cruddy for the past, 10 years. We used to blame it on designers, we used to blame it on developers, and it turns out it's mostly the fault of the tools. So our point was we need better tools, and we were starting to use them at that time. I think I was talking a little bit before about like the investment in for Frog. Traditionally, like we were an industrial design company, like I said, and so we had made lots of investments as industrial designers in not just the designing of beautiful objects, but also in investment in their manufacturing process. So an example on that, and it kind of relates a bit to what we saw as an opportunity here, Frog worked very early on with like the Sony Vega TVs, you know, like in the 70s, let's say, and made an investment in like a innovation in the manufacturing process of that industrial design piece, right? So this was at a time when all your TVs looked like furniture, you know, they sort of had big speakers on the side, you rolled them in, they had mahogany on them. They were nice, but they were definitely craftsman style. And so the innovation in manufacturing there was around injection molded plastic, and so how that would change the actual shape of the box, and it almost, you know, it changed the technology for the entire lifeline of those TVs, and it also sort of spawned a whole new era of consumer electronics. So in the same way that our investment in that kind of new manufacturing process or in innovation there changed what we saw as product design, we see the same thing now for software manufacturing, that it can open up a whole new innovation in terms of what we can do with software, just that manufacturing process streamlining. The other thing that we've invested in quite a bit on the industrial design side has been prototyping. You know, when you're making an object, half of what you have to make something so you can touch it. You want to see how heavy it is. You want to see where it's going to sit in the home, or how it's going to work in somebody's hand. And so as much emphasis there was around prototyping. So the company has a big legacy there. And traditionally, our developers were basically helping us prototype to simulate, simulate an experience. Using Director or Authorware or Flash, whatever it was, HTML, just to simulate something. So the other transition that we looked at here was moving our designers away from simulating an experience to actually building something. So those are the two big pieces, and that has to do with our goal of like not just envisioning some great thing and coming up with a great scenario for it, but actually translating that into reality. So that's also a bit of the chat. More of what we actually showed what we saw is like our traditional workflow of working as a consultant with a partner in terms of, roles and responsibilities and how there's a handoff. And, this is sort of the workflow process that we went through, from marketing, doing some, an MRD, over to an analyst thinking about the problem, some software architect building an architecture. And you start building it, use Studio, and you make your C+ code, and then you have your app. And then we forgot about the design, so we sort of tacked design on at the end. It's not really built into the workflow. We get the UI designer in Photoshop to make a comp, and he gives that to the dev, and we see what we can do. And that was, that's the process, basically. What we talked about last year was we thought there might be an innovation in this, where there's a real product. The designer is actually touching a piece of the code in this case, and the product was named Sparkle at the time. We were using this quite heavily. And we saw this as an opportunity for us to have direct impact into the products and make them better. So this still looks very clean and nice, and we'll see if this actually held true. This was our forecast as of about a year ago. And what we've moved forward from since then, we'll take a look at. So to kick it off, this was sort of, I'm trying to think when the exact day was. It was sometime in October. We had about 50 days till CES or something, work days. And the process that we went through, that we're going to walk through, is much more about a concurrent set of work streams, as opposed to this sort of cascading work streams. Like everyone up here, those people, were doing actual work at the same time, not waiting on anyone else. So that's the innovation a bit that we want to talk about, that both the product, the tools allowed us, but also sort of the method. I want to show some early concept work, so we're going to roll through lots and lots of pictures and little prototypes that these people built along the way, just to get a sense of how the process went through, and also to show you how tight the concept ended up being compared to what the vision was. And then we'll show you the demo that was actually built, or the pre-release software that was actually built for CES. So this concurrent process, just to give a sense of how this is very different than what I showed a second ago, with like nice little handoffs. All these people were moving right away from day one, right? So we had our design analyst, who's brooding there in the top picture, doing things in Visio and whiteboarding them. He's working on the interaction. We call this a design analyst, but he really thinks about the problem space in a deep way. Yahoo had offered up lots of their user research information, so we leveraged a lot of that. But so you see him working there right away on roughing out ideas, building up the feature design, and then in the end, towards the end, he starts sort of documenting some things as little as possible, but to the extent that we need to. And then right along with that, you have somebody like Kalani doing visual directions, sort of matching it. It's simultaneous to what's going on in the project. We have like the next tier, design techs actually building prototypes, and Eric at Yahoo is actually busy working and matching prototypes and hooking them up at the same time. If you guys want to say anything to that.
Yeah, just the ability to start making prototypes before the actual visual designs are finished, because a lot of times when the visual designer is working, creating the aesthetics, the interactive designer or the design technologist is just kind of waiting for kind of the comps to come over the cube wall, even though we don't have cubes. But so it's important to start prototyping early, because in a lot of the prototypes that you'll see, I kind of created a little bit of visual design just so that the prototypes looked realistic, but we didn't yet have any of the final visuals, so that's how we're able to kind of all be working at the same time. So.
Yeah, it's good to see. In the beginning, Evan and I were working together on the interactions and seeing kind of like the information architecture, the wireframes, and I'm trying to get my head wrapped around, how this thing is going to behave, and it's really going to affect how I would visually treat it. And so it's really cool to have all three of us kind of working in tandem. And
yeah, and it was difficult because the team is split all over the country. So I'm in Palo Alto. These two guys are from Austin. Josh is in Sunnyvale, but we're in different companies. So, And then Eric, you're in what? Minnesota?
Michigan.
Oh, Michigan.
It's all the same. Once you get out of California, it's all the same.
So that was another challenge that we had to deal with.
And then on the software side, we basically could build out all the architecture with really ugly UI that's just functional, and plug the real UI in later, and it helped us prove that our architecture was right without having to worry about making the application look pretty, and that was good for us.
So super overlap, super concurrent, very messy. Everyone, I think, especially the DAs and designers, this is very non-traditional for us. So everyone's a little scared and nervous, but we just push through it. So like this, we're just going to blow through a bunch of pictures right now of that process happening. So yes, the interaction designer is doing whiteboards of what this thing's going to be. Now, in general, the challenge also that Yahoo gave us, like, this is a little different thing, right? This isn't, we want to do, we do a lot of these, and we did a few, I think we did the MLB thing. Like, we want to do a brand new video experience in multimedia, and that's a perfect opportunity to use WPF. This is like an application that everyone in this room uses all day long, right? So you live with this application, even if it's not Yahoo, you live with an instant messaging client up the whole time. So it's a bit of a precious thing, And you use it, the other things to be aware of, you use it in relation to other things. It's a concurrent thing. You use this while you're doing Outlook, you use this while you're using the browser, so it's not a fully immersive experience. It's needing to be something that's lightweight, so these things go into the thinking here. The other one Josh mentioned a bit was that we wanted it to blend into look like it's a part of the Vista desktop. And what does that mean? A bit of that is it doesn't look like it's this immersive other alien, it's a part of your daily experience.
Yeah, and the other thing to mention there is that, when WPF came out, you have all these capabilities, as soon as you start a new project, you think 3D, animation, and so there's a tendency to forget about what the application actually should be. So we kind of had to, when we first started, I think brainstorming, everything was in 3D, so we had to kind of pull back and say, okay, just because we can do all this stuff doesn't mean we should do it. So
yeah. So in general, this is some one of the tools that we use, like that hasn't been chatted about. Like we use, Kalani uses Photoshop like it's a pencil. Like this is our sketching mechanism, and we're so fast at this tool that we don't even think of it as a tool. We think of it as just sort of like a watercolor brush in a way. And so we brush out these designs like this. This might just be an initial comp of something where we're looking at a buddy list that looks like it's chromeless. It just looks like it's just the content, Some of the stuff that we were looking at when we saw the thing we wanted to make a delta from with other messaging clients was they were all about Chrome. It's all about the 1,500 features that surround your buddy list, which is now this big in the middle of that. So we were really trying to turn that on its head, and make it look like it's all just content. It's just the buddy list. And we progressively show features along the way. To the extent that opening a message like this just starts off as minimal as it can be. How completely blended in can we be at this point? Surfacing only the most relevant features at the time, progressively showing more. Yahoo has a great feature that once people discover it, they love it, which is these avatars, which is a way to personalize your experience. You tie some identity to it. It provokes a reason to chat with somebody because they maybe have changed their avatar to a certain image.
Yeah.
But, go ahead.
So, as we're going through these visual explorations through these comps, we eventually ended up using little bits and pieces of a lot of different designs. And this particular design, the lack of chrome, breaking the border with the avatar, we actually kept that with where we ended up. So this is just one piece, and you'll start seeing that with the rest of these visuals, where you'll see little elements that actually stuck.
Yeah. To all the way trying to do something where we could like host the full body. There's a full body with these avatars a lot of times. And again, like that's a reason to chat with somebody because they're wearing a funny shirt today, right? And so it promotes dialogue. And our idea was what can we do to promote people chatting with each other more? Making conversations, zooming in when you're opening into a conversation, doing something different when you're chatting directly with someone. Different visualizations again, like this is a little more the 3D that Lee was talking about. Like, well, what would that be like if it was more of this panel that sort of zoomed up, almost like a movie trailer in this case. And on some of these, we were thinking about the technology that we did have. We do have this 3D panel, and I wonder if it would be an interesting thing to use. In the end, there's a bunch of innovations that went up in the product because of that kind of thinking, and so it is useful. This is just strange, but it's interesting. So and speaking of those innovations, this was another sort of directional point at this point. And these are happening super fast, right? This is like those sketches are in a few hours, on to the next set kind of thing. So this was another sort of direction that took off kind of quickly. And this one was actually looking at the window itself, just the mechanism of the buddy list window, and why doesn't it do something different when it's a little bit larger? Why does it just open up more empty space to the right? So knowing about this, what is it? The flow, wrap panel? Yeah. Knowing about that, what would it be like if when you open up the window, it starts filling up with more content as opposed to just white space? So you see this 2-column view of your buddies across the top. And I think at this point we were like, Lee saw it and was like, I want to build that.
Yeah, so this was in the really early stages where, again, there was no visual design, but I definitely think when you're making prototypes, it's important to try to get something in there so that it looks realistic. You don't necessarily need Robert De Niro and things like that in here. But so this was a prototype of first using the wrap panel. So in a traditional buddy list, if it's meant to be this narrow thing, if you expand it, it really doesn't get you anything except more white space. So with this type of thing, you could conceivably have different arrangements. And we actually ended up using this and animating it using the animated tile panel, I think. Mm-hmm. So the other thing this prototype was meant to show was how you could expose more information. So we have a slider down here, and as I drag it, what I'm actually doing is the image inside of this data template the size of it is being bound to the slider. So as it gets larger, as you see, as it gets to certain larger points, I'm exposing another piece of information below it. So I can scale these up until I get to the upper part. So the way this prototype worked is it's just one data template with all these pieces of information in, and then based on the size of the image, I'm choosing whether or not to show that information. So again, it's, this is like WPF. This is what it was made for, is to do this type of stuff. So, yeah.
Well, the other thing was, traditionally we might design a little comp like this that we have on one side, or Kalani would draw that. And we would sort of guess, what would that feel like if that was actually real? And, we would say, well, let's spend a week or two and make something, and then we'll know.
Yeah, it's really worth it because a lot of times these visual comps, because they're so beautiful, you're like, wow, this is going to be great. But as soon as you put it in a prototype and start moving around, it's like, this is awful. Yeah. So there's nothing that can really match actually seeing it and interacting with it before you decide on whether you're going to choose a certain direction.
Yeah, and we were prototyping in Sparkle at the time, correct?
Yeah, so when we started the project, it was the really early versions of Sparkle. So at that point, at the very beginning, I was using Flash to prototype because I wasn't feeling it. But then as it got better, like now I can prototype in Blend faster than I can in Flash. Yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, normally, I just remember normally we were like saying, should we prototype now or should we wait a little bit? And we sort of just opted in and said, no, let's just start prototyping.
Yeah, well, I mean, here again, I was really doing nothing at this point because, you know, Evan and Kalani were doing the visual design and the interaction design. So, you know, unless you're on another project, you might as well start prototyping. Yeah.
So the other one we looked at was, we just saw a little bit of it actually, was the, there's so many features in this application. You know, this like instant messaging is not what it sort of started off with, you know, in ICQ 10 years ago. It's very different, you know. And Yahoo's one of the most feature-rich, right, in terms of like status and presence of your friends, all the activities from voice to video to sharing and email, all integrated. So we started looking at other techniques to expose information. Just now, I think we just showed the prototype a second ago of like, I was using a zoom slider to show additional details about people, but this was like, what could we do with just interaction? So instead of a zoom slider, doing something with a mouse over event. And so this was another reason to prototype.
Yeah, so this is a really good example of what I was just mentioning. So if you look at the visual design here, it looks beautiful. Like, wow, you know, I roll over the contact and you get this, you know, more information exposed in this hover. So this was, you know, the initial prototype of that. You know, and it's not bad, and you can scale it up. When you get to the bigger sizes, it just becomes, I mean, this isn't perfectly prototyped either, so, but it just, so this was one of the cases where, and these hovers caused us a lot of grief. This particular thing was really hard to nail down, but, so this is where the prototype came in handy to say, like, maybe that's a bit, you know, intrusive to every time you mouse over, you get this thing completely covering the item below it.
Right. So we, you know, the visual, well, like, you think about the current workflow we showed earlier, right? So the interaction designer is kind of racing ahead. Kalani's like matching it, doing his own interaction design. Lee is now, you saw those snap points. He sort of, we see something that would be interesting, and concurrently he sort of begins prototyping it with something, for a prototype, fairly high fidelity, right? And like, I think those things happened within a matter of days. They were not like, you know, it was not a 2-week prototype effort. But anyway, so as we started extending some of the designs, and again, like Kalani said, a lot of this is just like hunting for interaction ideas, trying to find a technique both in the technology, also just in the design that makes sense, that solves some critical issue. A lot of this innovation, initially we focused on the list, the contact list. So one thing you think about is the grouping of lists. So, you know, a challenge is some people have, let's say, 300 people in their buddy list. Some people have, you think about a broader network of just a social network, you may have thousands of people in a social network, and they're all bound to different groups. What would it be like if you allowed multiple groups, dynamic groups, automatic groups, to sort of have their own treatment, their own sort of a rendering, their own window, make it more bound to the type of information that it is? And so there was a quick study around this, and so you see these headers at the top of these, and there's sort of a static group there, the Yankees buddies that are sort of sitting there. I have a manual group there in the middle, and then on the right we have this dynamic group. We call this, these are your music friends. These are people that have similar interests as you on the Yahoo Music site. And this was another one where I think we're like, hey, let's try to prototype this. That seems interesting.
Yeah, so basically, I think, Mark, you did the actual visual design on this one, right? Mm-hmm. So I saw this, and then I started thinking about, okay, so we're obviously going to need some type of circular layout. So for a prototype, I just got a bunch of album covers, and just based on the mouse position, it's, you know, extracting or, you know, increasing the diameter of the circle, just to kind of to get a feeling of what a group of objects stacked like that, and, you know, so we could potentially start, you know, an animation like this and animate out. So just, and this is really where my Flash background came in. So to Flash developers, this is nothing. I mean, we do this type of stuff every day. So in the WPF world, it's, you know, traditional Microsoft developers, this is kind of a new thing for people. But so this just kind of gave us an idea of how we might arrange things, like in a circular fashion.
Yeah, I think, so that gave us a sense of the feel, and we all thought, like, oh, that's kind of cool. I have no clue if it would actually be okay at the top of that window like that. One thing we were looking for was that almost visualization style, you know, to like a visualization per object type, and so that was why we kind of continued on this path with this prototype here.
Yeah, so here's actually, so kind of I go in stages. So I made the circular thing of album covers, and then I show it to you guys, and then they kind of give me an indication whether I should go further with it. So I kind of got that nod. So this was the next thing where, again, you'll notice that the actual chrome of the window here is not at all what is in the visual prototype. But things like creating aero glass for the whole application, although it's pretty well known how to do that now. At the time, I had no idea. I was really just learning WPF. So here's the same situation. So all of the albums are actually in a circle right now, but I'm only showing the top 5 here, and when I click, I can cycle through the different album covers. So it's taking that same prototype and modifying it to more fit in, and it doesn't look exactly like the visual design, but it was enough to kind of to give them an idea of how this would feel.
Yeah, so I think we kept up with this idea. This sort of spawned, we think this has validity both as a concept and interaction concept. It sort of makes an expansive buddy list instead of just sort of a contained one. I think we did these 2 prototypes, and then we even looked at like also another Yahoo property, like a Flickr automatic group, like a Flickr group showing up. And what would that be like if you have the same construct, where you sort of are matching the people in the group with the dynamic visualization across the top?
Yeah, so here's another example of, you would have dragged your Flickr, context out into the desktop, and so Kalani came up with this kind of visual design, and then I animated it in Blend. So you would basically have, a Flickr stream on the top of your contact list, and then when I mouse over, I get different states here, and I can cycle through the different photos from different contacts, or I can actually go out to the Flickr page for this specific photo. And here's an example. So the WPF animation system is still, it's great, but it's still not 100%. So here I'm doing animation with, in the Flash world, we have this on-enter frame event, which gets called every frame, and that's how we do animation. So there's something similar called composition target.rendering in WPF, and that's how I'm doing these animations. So that kind of really strong easing effect on the animation really is hard to duplicate in the existing WPF animation set. But I know that they're furiously working on I know that for a fact. Yeah.
Like up till now, we've been sort of like, that was like a couple of weeks of work, right? So, but a lot of innovation in what people think of as a buddy list, right? So from both the display to like what are buddy lists, like are they groups, they're automatic, they're dynamic. That's half of instant messaging. The other half is like actually the typing and the conversation window and your one-to-one communication. So at this point, I think the interaction designers in Kalani sort of jumped over to thinking about the conversation window. And I don't know if you want to talk about this one.
Yeah, so in this particular concept, we're exploring how you can surface more content like we were on the contact list. Instead of just stretching your Chrome and you just get nothing, you would get, maybe you could take advantage of the wrap panel that comes with WPF. So that's what we were doing with.
Yeah, I think the thing we were looking at is like, instead of, much like the contact list, we said like, line breaks actually really help reading at some point, right? Instead of reading a spreadsheet, you're reading what amounts to like a column of a newspaper, and those breaks actually make it easier to consume. The other thing is that this was one we definitely wanted to feel, so we had to prototype this. The other thing was that all of a sudden a maximized conversation window makes sense. Up till now, like for the past 10 years, a maximized conversation window didn't make any sense. This was the first pass at some of the early work on the Chrome of the application. And you can see again, like basically Chrome less as much as possible. It doesn't look like it's a bunch of icons inviting you to do other things. It looks like it's about a conversation window. It has sort of a wacky purple color, but that was part of an exploration as well. So I think we immediately wanted to prototype this.
Yeah, so at this point, and this is kind of one of the points where I really kind of clicked with WPF, because this control down here you see here is right out of the box. It's the flow document reader. It combines the functionality of flow document scroll viewer with the flow document page viewer. So I made essentially just a little bot that would, so I could type in anything here and send an IM, and then in the C# I'm actually, delivering a random response at a kind of a random time, just to simulate what a conversation might do. And you can see that we're automatically getting multiple columns. So here again, in a regular IM conversation, if you expand the window or maximize it, there's not a lot of benefit. I mean, unless there's paragraphs and paragraphs of text. But so with this flow document reader, it basically has all this functionality. So we have paging, so we can do multiple pages. If I want to just a standard, IM experience, I can go into scroll mode, and this is the way it exists today in most applications. And I also have things like obviously the text size slider. So all of this functionality comes right out of the box with this control. So it didn't really have to do a lot of work to make this kind of really rich prototype. So this multi-column thing I think was a really cool thing to put in there.
So we saw that, we're like, okay, that actually feels decent. We might actually use that. Normally we would spend a lot of time there, but because we were able to feel it, we felt pretty positive about it pretty quickly. We started also, like I said before, there's a lot of stuff in this client, right? And part of the goal wasn't to remove all the functionality. It was to make it better, to improve the functionality. This was showing also using this exact window, and you just bring in another communication layer like talking. So there's sort of a talking mechanism at the top. Looking at sharing video, so webcams or something like this. So again, doing something where it's about that object. It's about the video just sort of being the main object, the center of attention, as opposed to it being hosted in a panel, in a square, in a sub-panel, and over here, and then you scroll the thing. So maximizing that as much as possible. We also started looking at other techniques where we could do the compositing of, let's say, if you did want to have text at the same time as you were having a video conversation, compositing that as opposed to, again, having a separate panel on the side. Doing it, we called this almost our broadcaster view at this point, so we kept iterating here. Turning it into, this was the beginning, it was another very cool piece of functionality this app has, is the ability to sort of share a set of items, a set of pictures. So in this case, I'm on the share view, and you can see these are the items at the bottom that are sort of mutually being looked at. That's a picture in the middle that the two of us are looking at, so we called this our sort of a show and tell type feature. But again, cleaning it up and making it so focused on the content. A maximized view of that where it's almost like a kiosk. Transitions between these two. So this is again where we started showing this back and forth to, Kalani was working on this with Lee quite a bit. And this is one again where we said we need to prototype this to feel this because it seems fine right now, but I have no clue if this would actually work.
Yeah, so for this prototype, since there was an existing Flickr API for .NET, I thought it was important to actually make it pull in Flickr photos, and anybody could put in their Flickr ID. So, we could have just had a static set of photos, to use for this demo, but again, it's more realistic if it actually has to go out to the web and pull down these things. So this was the prototype that I created. So essentially it goes out to anybody's Flickr stream and pulls all your photos down at the bottom, and then I can click here to change photos. And we have a little bit of 3D in here. So this was kind of, at the time, I wasn't really seeing really good performance with this kind of full screen 3D flip type of stuff. So we didn't really go too far into that. But essentially, all of this stuff, well, I better not show that one. Sorry about that. So again, this prototype, everything is kind of working in here. So, we have the text here and the scaling thing. But yeah, we didn't really go too far with a lot of the 3D concepts because at the time, again, we were working in really early builds. So there were some performance issues that we were seeing on this one.
So at this time, this was probably about 3-4 weeks into the program. We basically had sort of corralled what we thought was what amounted to a design. We started extending this a little bit. These are some of the later pictures that we moved into. About as glossy as you can get, but we were sort of playing with these techniques at the time. New conversation windows, looking at colored windows, etc. We'll show some of this. So at this point, in terms of the core of the application in a few weeks, we had something fairly defined. I think we all had some, and we had some prototypes that sort of validated what we thought might actually work. Some other pieces that we did look at were there's a set of visualizations. I showed you the visualizations for the header, but there's also sound visualizations. There's emoticons, there's things like this that we started looking at as well. So Kalani drove a bunch of these. Initial video, these were actually just, there's some artifact going on the screen, but in general, you get what it is. So this is actually the visualization of what's coming into the microphone during a voice call. And so that was pretty important to do these. The workflow here was kind of unique. I'll let Kalani talk to some of these.
Okay. So yeah, we had this idea of we've got 4 things we can do that we wanted to surface: text, call, video, and share. And the call, instead of just making a call in the current state, it's just you're just looking at nothing. It's your text, and you're really not texting because you're talking. So we figured we might as well do something with that and take advantage of WPF. So I did these visual explorations in After Effects, basically just taking an audio file and saving it to keyframes, and then just putting that to any of the other built-in canned effects, basically, just to kind of get ideas of what we could do with it. And I'd hand these over to Lee and see what he could really do with it.
Who immediately told him that all of that's impossible in WPF, but someday.
Yeah, so we ran through several of these. These were the very quick, actually I like this one. These were the very quick sort of studies on this. And again, this is one of the things we thought was kind of interesting. We thought it was cool. But Lee actually did take the time to go through and sort of build up some of these prototypes to see what they would look like. So
yeah, you see in a lot of Kalani's videos, there's a lot of blurs and kind of this organic stuff. I mean, it looks way better than the prototype I did, but no matter how we tried it, it's just not possible to do that type of stuff yet. So in this prototype, so essentially I'm using vector graphics from Illustrator that I exported to XAML. And then, so essentially, you have 2 representations here. One is your voice, and the other, obviously, is the person you're talking to. So you could actually change, shapes for yourself or for them, kind of with the idea that, you might be able to provide a whole slew of vector shapes that the user could customize and choose. So again, it doesn't look quite as smooth as what was done in After Effects. But, it's still acceptable.
It's cool, yeah. So we were pretty much a fan of some of these. There are other visualizations that we started working on as well. This is sort of instead of dynamic visualizations, more progress animations. This is when a call is in progress we looked at. And the process on these was generally Kalani, he's got deep knowledge on After Effects and that sort of suite. So that was a good use of, a good way to leverage what he already knew. The other thing we looked at was some initial studies around emoticons and what is a way to make emoticons a bigger part of the experience, literally bigger, but also sort of a more dynamic part of the overall experience. And that was, again, just a quick movie comp that we did. In the end, I'll show you what came from that. I'll kind of speed up a little bit here. We looked at one of the core problems of messaging in general is you can have 40 of these things going on at one time, and that's not a bad thing. That's good. That just means you're somebody who loves messaging. So we looked at window management designs. So this was I think week 7 or something. We kind of made it past a design direction and started looking at some more fundamentals. Again, this was one we thought we had built up some interaction designs. We wanted to look at some prototypes of this. So Lee actually built this.
Yeah, so this one's very similar to what the visual design was. Essentially the idea that your avatar is what you drag around in order to create tab conversations, to get out of tab conversations, to drag yourself or drag a contact into the sidebar, which you'll see. So once I do this, once I start dragging, then you kind of see the drop zones. And we actually did another one where you wouldn't see the drop zone until you moused over here. But essentially when I drop into the group windows, then it becomes a tab conversation. And then I can drag the tab out, I see the avatar, and when I drop, my windows are back again.
Yeah. So that was at that point we were at about day, I don't know what it was, day 45 or something. We had 10 days really to sort of actually pull a lot of this stuff together for what was this CES demo. So at this point, Josh is going to run this. He actually has run this demo about, I think, 1,400 times, so it'll be...
That's right.
We probably should go fast. But it's nice to see because what you're going to see is the culmination and what actually sort of made it through the little gauntlet to get in this pre-release bit.
So one of the other things that's a benefit of the demos or the prototypes that they were doing that we forgot to mention is internally, part of my job is to make sure that the people at Yahoo who would eventually have the say-so whether or not we release this product or what changes we'd want to make, when I show them a screenshot, I have to basically talk a lot about how cool it will be or how this will really please our users. When we have these prototypes, we can actually take them down to our usability lab, put them in front of users, which we did on multiple occasions. And I can show these to people in a boardroom or wherever, and they immediately just get it. And then we can move on with developing instead of spending time convincing people that we're doing the right thing. So that has been extremely helpful. Now, that being said, this is the demo that we did show at CES, the culmination of all this hard work of the team. So let's get started. You'll see a lot of the things they worked on represented. So first, it's good to keep in mind that Vista runs this sidebar by default. Every one of the millions of users who will get Vista will have a sidebar, so we'll get back to that later. So this is basically the default screen that everyone would see. And we've added our contact list here. And you can resize the contact list just like you saw before, and you can fill in the space very nicely. And again, what we wanted to do is turn this from a list of people's names to really a dashboard for your friends or people you work with. And by doing that, we show more of the Yahoo network, what people are up to on the Yahoo network, and maybe other properties in the future. And this just brings people back to Yahoo and back to this contact list over and over again, much more than just a name in a list. So we can go ridiculous size, we can go back down. And people also say, well, I just want to get my work done. Can you make it real small? And of course, you can do that too. And you'll see the Windows logo here. Even the prototype interoperates with Windows Live Messenger, just like our existing software does today. So another thing, you saw this color picker before in its infant stage. And here's just a great feature of how just the fact that we're using WPF and we're thinking of what new things can we do, we come up with something like this, where you don't ever really need a color picker, but users really want to be able to customize their experiences, even in small things like the color. And so we can enable this in a fun way that doesn't get in the way of your work. So moving on, let's start a conversation. So I'll talk to Tilly here. What we can actually do is open up a couple more conversations. Now, when you start to open multiple conversations, one thing that happens is your screen starts to get a little cluttered. And just like you saw before with dragging windows together, what we can do is just drag these two together, and now they're in tabs. We can do the same thing here. We can also drag these tabs out. Now let's talk to Tilly. Tilly, can you send me one of those new emoticons? There we go. That's just a real early idea, and we're going to be making those much more refined in the future. And the cool thing about this is I get a lot of IMs from people who really want to see this application in their hands. So this is actually just a random person who IM'd me during my demo. And sometimes, like at 2 a.m. when I'm testing the latest build, I'll tell them I'm in a secret Yahoo lab and I'm using the latest demo, and they're the first one I've tried it with. And a lot of these guys are from Romania for some reason. They get very excited. I don't know what's that. So let's do a call with Tilly. So in this case, just like you saw before in the prototypes, when the call is initiated, you'll see the voice visualization. In this particular prototype, it's not working now. But the idea here is just like when you have other software that has these music visualizations, you'll be able to do the same thing here. And also keep in mind that we're staying all in one window when we do these new functions. So when I click Share to go to the Show and Tell feature, and I click Share Photos, I'm not opening a new window. If you'll notice in a lot of the Messenger applications or IM applications that are out there, just when you talk to one contact, all of a sudden you may have like a video over here, a voice over here, and the IM over here. And it's like you're talking with one person. Why would you want this disjointed experience? So by keeping it in one window, we're really promoting this idea that people want, which is they really want intimacy with another person. And that's also what show and tell is about. So what this is doing, this is a picker for photos that I want to share with Tilly. So in this case, it's actually using the Vista desktop search, which does an index of your latest photos and other files in the background. And so we're taking advantage of that. We don't have to do our own search. And we're showing the latest photos that you've touched or uploaded or downloaded to your computer. And then also we're going out on the Yahoo network, and we're saying, what are the photos that you've interacted with lately on the Yahoo network? And we show the most recent ones here as well. So let me just drag a few of these down. Just double click that one. And then once I'm ready, I can click done. And these photos are actually sent over to Tilly, and she gets the same experience I do. She can add the same photo. She can add different photos that I could see. And again, if somebody just buys this new Vista computer, they want to take advantage of this awesome new LCD screen they got. We don't want to confine them to a little space with these beautiful photos, so we go full screen. And we do the same thing with the voice visualizations as well. And that, we call it show and tell, because as you're sharing these experiences, you can talk as well. So I'll show you a couple other things. So we saw those album covers in the Flickr group. There's also another group, Fantasy Football. And here it's in my contact list. And the way it got in my contact list is we're doing something called automatic groups. And a lot of people who are new to Messenger will just have one friend in their list. And maybe that friend's not online all that often. And they simply just stop using it. So by filling in the contact list with groups they've already established, it just helps people get engaged with the application. So here's Fantasy Football. And you can see these cool Kalani visuals of the helmets bashing into each other, and these are the latest matchups for the week. I'll show you one last thing, which is back to the sidebar gadget. It would have been really easy from an interaction design standpoint to just say, you know what, let's just make the contact list really tiny and shove it in the sidebar, and then you can see all your friends. And we may actually do that in the future. But we wanted to, as part of this project, working with Frog Design especially, we wanted to see where are the areas where we can innovate and think of new things to take advantage of the fact that we are on this new operating system. And so what we thought through is the fact that some people really only have one or two top friends that they want to check in on a regular basis. So in this case, I can just take Tilly's avatar and just drag her avatar to the sidebar gadget, and there she lives. And if you're familiar with gadgets, you know that you can actually create multiple gadgets. So you could have multiple contacts on the sidebar, and you'll be able to drag more contacts into this single gadget. And you can also put them all over the screen as well. So that's the overview of the demonstration that we showed, and we're obviously actively developing this so we can get it out in a public beta.
So it's kind of nice. You can see, like, we've never given this presentation, like, so where you see the pre-work and then what it ended up being and how much of the prototype stuff was actually leveraged. So it's actually nice to see. Now, what we kind of want to hurry through now, because we're down to like about 20 minutes, I want to run through actually some of those workflows you saw there. What was the process there? How did those pieces get in there? There was some rough stuff that we'll show, some pain, some pleasure, lessons, and tools. So it's a little masochistic, but we'll go through it. So in terms of like pain, one of the hard ones that we actually dug in on initially was this sort of conversation window. I'll kind of let Eric chat.
Yeah, so you saw the conversation window, and in its current form, what you saw, the XAML's getting to be about 5,000 lines on its own. And so what we really needed to do was kind of step back and factor it better using the user controls and some of the stuff that WPF gives you, so that when we hand everything over to the designers to actually style, they can load it into the tools. If things get out of hand, then the tools choke, and then the designers can't work in the flow that they want. That's one pain point when you start to get a complex piece of functionality in one window or one small part of the app. Another pain point was in our case was the initial integration when the tools weren't quite up to speed and we were doing a lot of things by hand. You know, we were running with the software architecture as fast as we could, and the designers and the design technologists were running as fast as they could, developing prototypes. but then it's time to mesh the two, and that was a pain point. You know, it was a good 2 days, which isn't a long time in general, but in this world it kind of is a long time because we were running so fast. And so that initial pain point of integrating the real end visuals and end interactions with the real architecture when they're sort of divergent was hard at first. So, you know, I think the lesson we learned there was sort of, if you can, start with the tools, use the tools the whole time, try to stay within the real application as much as you can, and prototype only when necessary, and that way the integration pain is less.
Blend is definitely that integration point, you know. I think, you know, a lot of our all of our prototypes and our designs were coming together in Blend, and at the time, you know, you couldn't open a lot of projects in Blend, so it really wasn't there like there was something wrong with the project. You'd be building something in Visual Studio, try to open it in Blend, and you get some cryptic, you know, exception that, and you really couldn't figure out what was wrong with it. So as the tools got better, it also helped us. You know, we could open more and more things in Blend, and now I think it's pretty solid. But yeah, definitely the idea of breaking stuff out into user controls, because they're smaller pieces. So even if the whole app could open in Blend, you don't really want your designers and, you know, interactive designers to be working on this huge solution file, because everything is a lot slower to build and design. So modularizing the components of the application definitely helps to work in Blend. So.
Yeah, just as a note with that, the color picker that you saw, when Lee handed that off, it was a user control, and all we really had to do was put in a couple hooks that hooked into our architecture, and we used it as is. So it saved us a lot of time in terms of even integrating someone else's code, let alone an Illustrator document or something like that. And, you know, Lee just handed it off. I put it in the app, did a couple things, and we're done.
And a lot of this was, you know, I was just starting with WPF. I mean, really, everyone was just starting because it was new. But I didn't really know what user controls were when I first started. So as we got more, you know, farther along, my prototypes started to be built in a way, you know, thinking about how you were going to integrate it. In the beginning, I was just, you know, he'll figure it out.
Right.
You know, so.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So in this particular example, we're going to kind of go through the concept creation of the color picker and the workflow, and how we got the idea for it. So I did some visual explorations in Cinema 4D because I've got real lighting, and I can kind of see. I wanted to simulate lighting, and I used the 3D viewport in Blend. I was exploring, you know, learning the tool. At the time, there was some heavy lack of anti-aliasing, so it was aliasing pretty bad on all geometry. So for the sake of the demo, we ended up actually cooking out pings that had big shadows in, as you've seen in the demo that we showed. But let's see here. So I worked with a few different ideas. This was one concept where maybe it's a Rolodex, you flip through it, but the interaction of it got a little messy, and I couldn't really figure out a proper solution for it. So, and the idea of creating an easy way to pick a color without having to go through like a full hue, saturation of the whole color, of every color. I mean, simplify it and just choose like 5 or 6 and maybe some textures. And this example right here, later on, they fixed the anti-aliasing issue, and I made one control which will probably end up using this in the final. But you hover over it, and you get a little bit of ambience with it. And I had to fake the shadow because you don't actually get casted shadows with the lights in the 3D viewport yet. So this is how we solved that. I just made 2 planes, animated them both, and did a mouse over event on the other one.
Yeah, so the actual color picker that was in the build that Josh just showed, it looks like 3D, but actually Kalani baked out some pings that were set in 3D space. So we avoided the pitfalls of WPF 3D by bringing in, and most of these are fixed now, and the alias issue is on XP. So if you're doing WPF 3D and people are going to be on XP viewing it, you're going to see a lot of aliasing artifacts. So on Vista, it looks pretty smooth like this prototype. So.
Yeah, another example, I'll kind of run through this. Another example was those football things that sort of crashed against each other. Like they kind of, when we initially showed them, so I think some developers were like, oh, wow, the 3D thing really works well. And we're like, that's not 3D. Like that's more 3D than some games can do. So but we wanted it to be a very animatic thing. We wanted it to have all this motion. We did all these distortion. You see, it's got motion blur, etc. So the process here was pretty much, we decided we wanted to go this more of an image-based route. And you can see some of the reasons, just the distortion in the image that's happening here, the motion blur as it's moving. Blur. That's what's making it look real. That's what's making it not look like some vector animation. And you could not get this kind of 3D support in there. So in the end, what this was creating some assets in Cinema 4D and After Effects, making them out using a ping sequence as that image header in this case.
Yeah, I mean, it's important that something like that is not a limitation of WPF. You could never get that type of fidelity on any platform, even in games. So even on the PS3, you're not going to get that like perfect rendering with motion blur. So so just a note in general about pings, there's nothing wrong with, vectors are the things that are touted for WPF, and rightfully so, but for certain things, there's nothing wrong with using a ping sequence if it's really important to the interaction to make it look really well. And that was one example.
Yeah, it also gave us just a more steady, it was a more consistent experience. Like the frame rate would be fairly consistent, whereas if it was, sometimes we tried to do something in 3D, it was a lot of volatility just based off the machine.
And just from the developer standpoint, WPF doesn't have support for ping sequences per se, and so they're very resource intensive, and so there's a lot of work that needs to be done under the hood to support ping sequences without killing memory, killing performance, and kind of grinding things to a halt. So just be aware when you start to do things like that, there's going to be legwork that you need to do behind the scenes to get that to work correctly in the real deployment.
Yeah. So in the end, I kind of race through this so we have time for questions. What we basically are saying is there's this point you can hit where there's a tight workflow where it's very iterative, where somebody like Eric stands up something that's the core of the functionality. It sort of sits in there. Then our roles of design technologist and designer can iterate on that, and they're actually touching it, and then they can check that in, and then they can iterate back and forth. Eric can assist them with that. So that's the tight workflow that we're now in, whereas before we were in sort of a refactored design. In terms of tools, like we all use these tools, but everyone uses them for a little bit different purpose. We'll kind of race through this. Our design analysts, actually, our interaction designers are not using Blend. They're using, they're using Word, or they're using OmniGraffle or Visio. When they do simulate things, they use things like PowerPoint, etc. Kalani uses Blend for a sort of a different set of tools. He might use it to stand up a basic shell right now to get his color values, etc. But using that Photoshop pencil is a big piece of what we do. To a certain extent, we knew we wanted this application to have a very visceral, animatic experience, so Cinema and After Effects became something, and still use Flash for small things. We're not objecting to using Flash inside this application even. So we are pulling from whatever resources we can. I'll let you kind of talk to your tool. Yeah,
so the tools that I use definitely Blend. And for any WPF thing that I'm working on, I always have Blend and Visual Studio, open at the same time, open to the same solution, because if you've used Blend and the XAML editor in there, it's kind of hard to actually call it an editor. So definitely, I always have Visual Studio and Blend open. And then also Photoshop. So a lot of the early stuff, I'd get PSD files from Kalani, and then I'd have to, similar to a web developer, I'd have to chop up the actual visual design or recreate certain things inside of Blend.
Mm-hmm. And then from the developer side, we're in Visual Studio 90% of the time, but we do use things like Blend to do styling, templating, animations that we're just trying to figure out how they work. But also there's debugging type tools like XAML Pad, and I call it a debugging tool because it's more figuring out why this snippet of XAML isn't working the way I expect, or just tinkering with something that I'm going to drop into the project. Snoop is something that allows you to do sort of runtime debugging of the visual tree when you're not sure why something's not looking correct. It can interact with that and show you a lot of the internals without you having to instrument your code. And then Reflector is a tool that is more of a .NET developer tool, just real nitty-gritty why is this code working the way it is, or if you're given some code, allowing you to dig into it, even if you're not given the source code. So, developers stay sort of on the non-visual tools side a lot.
So I think one thing is, like, the reason to go through those tools is the thing that I've been walk through the sessions and the designer developer thing. We're actually saying there's more nuance to it than just that, right? So we have developer, designer, what are you? Designer, developer sometimes. We have our interaction designer who's doing different things. So there's a lot of different people involved in this mix right now, and it's not actually just two people sitting in a room, and also even their roles in the projects actually switch sometimes halfway through. So we have some time for questions. If you guys have any, that'd be cool. Yeah.
My question is on the concurrent process. You guys were essentially refactoring a messaging program, but by and large, everybody knows the functionality behind a messaging program. My question is more when it's a brand new application or something completely different. How do you get so many people, like in your case, you guys were about 6, working on the same thing, having the same guides, when it's something that, like a lot of the information is not available. Yeah. Especially if you're getting rid of all the docs and all that.
I'd say I'll speak to, like, from a user experience perspective, how we sort of align that. Like, I would say, even though this seemed kind of straightforward, like we want a Vista Messenger thing, like, it was actually super wide open in terms of what it was going to be, right? It might actually be a full screen experience. It might be this sort of, alternative desktop view. It's more about, it was like, we had thoughts from, it's all about voice first, and text is this sort of back-end mode that you might get to. So even this thing where we said, like, hey, it was kind of a known thing, was extremely wide open initially. And I would say one way that we sort of keep reins on that is we're sort of on the role of whoever the UX lead is to keep concept direction sort of moving ahead. We've had something where I would say in the first 3 or 4 weeks, we had pulled it from a very broad set of studies down to something very sort of more targeted. It ended up being something that was somewhat close to the current experience, more nuanced and fixing sort of bugs that have always been there. But in general, I say it's a part of the lead to sort of structure some of that. From a UX perspective, from technology, it's a different thing.
Yeah, I mean, if you had been in on the very early brainstorming, there were like bubbles with your contacts floating around the desktop. I mean, we kind of were thinking of it like it was a new type of application. How it would differ if it was really was something that didn't exist. I'm not really, obviously there'd probably be more of a role for the interaction designer and more research at the beginning. So we had a lot of research already because Yahoo has a ton of it on Messenger, obviously. So there would probably be more emphasis on that side of it, before we actually started prototyping and designing, maybe.
Because I'm heavily trying to push for prototyping in my workplace, and it's being met with some resistance sometimes. Mainly, the main factor I'm finding is that they want time limits. Do you guys have any guidance for that?
Well, I know personally, a lot of the prototypes, I was never asked to do them. So, like, that's kind of the way I approach things. So if I would be listening to them talk about something, or, so it wasn't like a formal, like, okay, Monday and Tuesday, Lee's going to be prototyping this. I really didn't have much to do, so I just started creating prototypes. And so even if they told me not to do it, I would do it. So I don't know if that helps.
That's what I do.
The other thing about that from the developer side is I prototype all the time, and I do it with the intent of rolling it back into the code. Because I don't always, especially with Messenger, in order to test a feature, if I'm putting it into the mainline code base, I have to bring up the app, log in, do some clicks to get to that point. Oh, it didn't work. Okay, kill it, go back. So what I end up doing is we've built out, I think I have 60 or 70 prototypes, each doing a different piece of functionality, but I build it such that I can take the classes and drop them into the app. And so one of the things to kind of make your case to management is, these prototypes aren't just throwaway code. these are things, when Lee gives me a prototype, I use most of it. And, you know, I may have to tweak it, but it's coming in sort of as is. And so if you show them a flow where you say, okay, here's this blocky application, and then you switch and you go do a prototype real quick, and then you pull that real code in and make your application look pretty. You can do that in the span of an hour probably,
Yeah,
and it's powerful.
Yeah, so the other thing is if you're doing prototypes and you come up with something cool, even if it's not used on that project, it's still a part of, like, you know, your library of stuff. So, you know, some stuff we prototyped here, it will probably get used on some other project. I think the real selling point, though, is when there's a visual design comp and everybody is like, you know, this is great. And if you do a prototype, and by doing the prototype, you show them that, no, it isn't, because now once it's moving around, it's ridiculous. So that's real value, because if you were to choose to go ahead with something just based on the visual prototype, that can lead to disaster, I think.
So a couple of quick comments on that. Also, Yahoo uses agile development, so we have these sprints that are by its nature highly iterative, and we do, you know, a daily call with Frog Design and Yahoo, just going through all the things we're working on. So there was no way that a project like this could succeed if we had just kind of kept in our own little roles and like eventually checked in with a final document. Nothing would have happened. And just as a side, before we finish the rest of the questions, our team, including our interaction designer at Yahoo, Dave Feldman and Brian Coe, we're going to be at the Mix chat later today. So if we don't get to your question now, we can talk to you later.
G'day, Shane Morris from Microsoft. I've got a prototyping question as well. I was interested in your approach about your early prototypes having finished looking visuals, even if they're not the intended final treatment. I guess there's a school of thought that says use those build those early prototypes in sort of a wireframe format, so that you can test your interaction design, usability test your interaction design before you apply the visuals. So I just wondered whether you could comment on the pros and cons of both those approaches from your experience.
I think it would be based on the background of the prototyper. So I have a visual design background, so it almost takes me just as long to create something that's like squares than it does to just throw in some, you know, I just had random pictures in there. But I really think that my personal opinion is, like, wireframe type prototypes, they still don't really get the message across unless it somewhat looks like it could be a real application. Like, so if I didn't have photos in there and I just had squares, I mean...
Yeah, I mean, part of what we're doing is also we're trying to make this thing emotionally resonant, right? You want to like it, you know? And yes, you know, you can test the order and the nomenclature and those kind of things in a wireframe, and that's fine. But, like, we definitely push for as real as possible, as soon as possible, because we're trying to make a product that people are going to love, not just sort of have a high success rate. So.
But I often get told, like, don't worry about that. We just want to see the motion. And, you know,
who tells you that?
I think you actually. So it's really dependent on. Obviously, you don't want to spend a lot of time on visual design that's going to be thrown away. But I think it doesn't take that much longer to do something that you know, looks like it's maybe a real application.
I mean, a bit of that also goes to the concurrency thing, right? It was like we immediately snapped to whatever we had that was the latest flavor. And we said, yep, if we had to stop today, this is what we would ship. Let's choose that. We did not wait for everything to finish, you know, whether it was prototypes or wireframes or interaction design or anything. So
can I just ask, did you guys do any usability testing of those early prototypes?
Yeah, absolutely. We had some of these prototypes in we have a usability lab at Sunnyvale, and we have what we call rolling studies. So we can literally just, if we have something that we have at 9 a.m. that day, and we say, ooh, let's see if people like this, or, you know, if they have difficulties, where can we solve that? And so we put them in the lab.
Yeah, and we would just take what we had handy. You know, some of it was formal, some of it was like, well, we have the scaling thing halfway done. Let's see if anyone even understands what this is. So.
We actually usability tested something like, I think 4 weeks before Josh even started. About 4 weeks into the project, we had a working application that we put in front of users to test, you know, a couple interaction sequences that our designers wanted. And that's something that in the past, you know, they would go prototype in Flash. And the problem with that is that's just wasted effort. And because we were able to move fast and actually have it visually compelling enough to put in front of users, that was, you know, that's pretty powerful. So.
Great. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
A question for Yahoo. I'm wondering, in the absence of hardcore requirements and say UML and the traditional workflow, how Yahoo's confidence that all the features that they wanted in this application were going to be there, and all those usual milestones that you would go through in traditional development.
Right. So there's really a couple stages in the development. One is you know, for us certainly is the more fun stage, where we're coming up with ideas, we're prototyping them. Eric's actually building them in almost seems like near real time. And so what we get is prototype that, or an application that we all use and we put through its basic tests, and we make sure that the stuff that we would think of and the stuff that we know that's documented should be there. Then what we have is concurrent to that, what you call more of the classic process, where we have a whole QA team. And they say, you know what, we need more answers as to how this should work, because we're testing it and we don't know what the expected behavior should be. And this is where it's really important to work with people, especially in Yahoo, who've been working on instant messaging clients for a long time. And instead of documenting everything fresh for them, they can actually look at how things have worked in the past and infer if something is working correctly or not.
So did you deliver any kind of, here's a base feature set and move forward from that?
Right. So again, in the sprint process, we have what's called a backlog, and we kind of draw a line. The features go from most important to least, and we draw a line and we say above this line, all of these features should be working. And so we have this feature list that we put with the latest build for the QA team to look at.
And any milestones in that sprint?
Yeah, it's not an exact science, especially with sprinting is, you know, the ideal way to sprint. That's, you know, they say you always have to have a potentially shippable product like every 2 weeks. And of course, Yahoo wouldn't just take, you know, our alpha after 2 weeks and say, hey, we could ship it today. I mean, you'd have to have a legal review and all these things. So we call it potentially shippable, and what that really means is people internally can use the features that we built. And so actually, what exactly was your question? I started having...
Well, just sort of any kind of hard milestones or any kind of structure to the process that says we're on track, we're going to get there, other than a date at the end.
Yeah. So every sprint, we have the sprint manager, which is an application that shows which tasks that we've outlined for ourselves and how we're doing on those. And then something like CES is a milestone where it's not necessarily in a release to beta milestone. It's a great milestone to get the team really catalyzed around this thing where we all know it's going to go and be shown to the public. And then we have internal milestones, like, for example, internal alpha that we distribute. And there you have to have a higher level of confidence that's going to work well, because you're going to have everyone from the CEO, you know, to a person in the Bangalore office using it, and they're going to have questions about it.
Great, thanks.
I'm with a healthcare software company, so I'm real curious to discover how WPF can scale to a monolithic application, say with hundreds of screens. Do you think it's ready for that type of vertical application?
That's a good Eric question.
Yeah. So the short answer is it depends. You know, there's for a large monolithic application, you're looking at more developer time, making sure that the underpinnings are cleaning everything up properly, and the things that you would have to do in the normal application world. The trap you fall into with .NET development is that, oh, the framework's going to take care of everything for you, and it doesn't. I mean, that's just the reality. And so when you get into a large-scale application, you know, .NET is ready. I mean, I've seen, you know, a lot of large-scale client applications written in .NET, and then the caution that you have to use with WPF is to use it for the technology in terms of getting things up and running fast and the ease of iteration, as opposed to the flashy features, and you see all the voice visualization, things like that. You know, that stuff may not scale well if you're using it all over the place, but if you're using it to build the traditional Windows application, then yeah, I think it'll do a real good job, because there's so many features in the framework that, you know, if you use them correctly, you'll get good performance even in an application of that size.
Right. The next question is, how is Frog positioned to help verticals like healthcare software, for example? Are you prepared as a company, or do you have competitors that may be better positioned for?
Well, I would say, like, the emphasis that we made, we do have like Yahoo's an early adopter, Microsoft's an early adopter of some of this technology. We jumped on the technology because we thought it could best leverage our skill set. We care about making great designs into reality, so that's why you see us a lot with these guys. However, we do a lot of, let's say, large-scale, non-WPF enterprise applications as well. We are always, because of the pain we've gone through on some of those, like those applications that are multi-year, giant specification, everything's pulled together, and still the product that comes out, it's rarely it's a surprise, but it's rarely a good surprise. It's sort of what emerges. So we are actively looking to take what we have here as like consumer technology so far, been demonstrating that, and apply it to some large-scale solutions. So, yes.
Out of time, or? Okay.
I don't know what the red dot means, but go for it.
Till they tell us.
Yeah.
Alan Lee, Vertigo Software. What do you think is the ideal ratio of design technologists, and developers for future interactive apps like Yahoo Messenger?
I think that the ratio that we showed here, in terms of the user interface layer, the UI layer, is a very healthy ratio. That was one of the things I wanted to talk about. It's like somebody who really thinks about interaction design like our analyst, somebody who really, okay, take them offline. So interaction design like our analyst, a visual designer to really think about the UI layer, a liaison to sort of take those things and translate them into something that can be managed, and then an engineer who can actually do something with that, and that workflow is very tight. So the 4 is about right.
The only thing I would add to that is, depending on the application, you just need to get it so that no one's blocked and no one's behind.
Yeah.
So if these guys are churning out visuals faster than we can bring up the application architecture to support those visuals, that's bad. So we need more developers. At the same point, if we're sitting there building out all this architecture that isn't being leveraged yet on the visual side, then
well, then we're going to have to tack the design on.
So it depends. Yeah. It depends on your application.
Thanks.
Yeah. We can do the rest of the questions over here if we can. They're really flashing all this text with us right now.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.